Good afternoon. This is Muslim Network TV's Critical Talk, which is hosted by Professor Aminah Al-Deen. Um, this past week, I've tried to play ostrich and keep my head in the sand with all of the shenanigans and stuff going on. And my producer made a quote today that I want us to think about as we work our way through this program about winning the political battle, but perhaps losing the moral war. I have today with me Critical Talks political, what do I want to say? Pundit, regular, expert, all of those things, and Professor Scott Hibbard. Scott Hibbard teaches courses on American foreign policy, Middle East politics, and international religions. He's been a DePaul faculty member for, I'm sure, in his estimation, just long enough to be crazy. And he has taught at the American University of Cairo and a number of other places. And he's the author of Religion, Politics, and Secular State, Egypt, India, and the United States. And he co-authored Islamic Activism and U.S. Foreign Policy. We have a lot to cover. Let me say that we have a third person, Professor Khalil Marrar, that may join us later. Um, how's your week been, Scott? Hey, how you doing?
Good. Nice to see you again, Aminah. How are you?
I don't know how we're still smiling. That's the issue.
It's been a long week.
I mean, have the weeks expanded to 14 days, giving up on 10, or what's happening?
Yeah.
So I know you're teaching about all of this, and I'm going to vary from just a little bit from the questions. What are you teaching about? How are students responding?
Yeah. So right now I'm teaching courses on Mideast politics, and I'm teaching another course on international relations and diplomacy. So there's much more of an international focus, but obviously on the Thursday after election, we dedicated time to get some feedback from students. And on Tuesday, we digressed a little bit to talk a little bit about student reaction to the elections. And what's kind of interesting to me was there was obviously a lot of uncertainty in Thursday.
Yeah.
And students were obviously surprised, as were many of my colleagues, with the indeterminate outcome. I mean, there really was this expectation that there would be a blue wave, and that President Biden or President-elect Biden would have won a number of states rather handily. And people were really quite shocked that it was so close. So and this gets back to your point about the political victory, but not the moral victory. There was no repudiation of Trumpism, even though President Trump did lose the election, or he hasn't yet to concede. But all the news, the indication is that President-elect Biden won the election. But the House, the Senate did not. The Senate stayed in Republican hands, or is likely to stay in Republican hands.
Yeah.
The House lost, and the Democrats lost a number of seats in the House.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, they did.
See, that's why I didn't turn it on.
The Democrats still have a majority, but it's a much more narrow majority than they had before. So again, this was not the repudiation that many of the Democrats had hoped for, many had expected. The early polling had indicated that the Democrats were much further ahead in a number of states, and that turned out not to be the case.
But we talked a little bit. Hey, Khalil.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. I don't know where you are, but it's not at home. We talked. You mentioned to me before we got on air something about the media. Let's talk about the media hand in all of this.
Well, I think there's two sides of it. One is just the framing of the debate. And I think one of the things that the indeterminate outcome of the election, or the really close margins in the election, highlight is that as a society, we really are deeply divided. And more to the point, we live in different media universes. I mean, when I talk to relatives or friends that are in the other camp, let's leave my political affiliations aside, we disagree on basic facts about what's happening in the society. And they're getting their information from sources that, in my opinion, are just empirically unreliable.
Yeah.
They would argue the same thing. They think I'm a deluded, university. But it's a really important part of the narrative that where people are getting their information really shapes their views. And this is why when the president goes on the campaign trail and he's making certain arguments, they resonate because it's reinforced by certain media streams. Whereas when he goes on the stump and he makes these outlandish claims, mainstream media looks at it and they start fact checking his statements. And so again, one side of the society gets their media from one source, which is going to be much more critical of the president, and the other side gets their media from a source that's going to be much more apologetic to the president.
I was watching, and I try my best to go around the media because I don't know if it's on your particular cable box, but there have been in the last few years a number of news sources that have popped up to compete with CNN and MSNBC, something called Newsy, something called America One. And largely they have been conservative news sources adding their voices to Fox. I am surprised at the lack of professionalism of both the host and the guest, but I try to turn them on, because you got to try to get both sides. But you're absolutely right. You hear stuff and you say, my God, where did you get that from? And I hear it also on CNN and MSNBC, as they are unapologetic in their biases.
Well, increasingly more so over the last 4 years. I personally happen to be a major fan of PBS NewsHour.
There you go.
And BBC, and because I think that's really where you do have a genuine debate. They'll have people on panels representing multiplicity of perspectives,
right?
Not to try and make a point. And I think that's the way journalism once was, and where you really did have higher standards of higher expectations, if you will, and higher standards of journalism.
Khalil, to bring you up to speed, we're jibber jabbering. Scott said a little bit about his students' reaction to the predicted blue wave when it didn't happen. And, he reserved a little part of his class because students that probably were chomping at the bit and wouldn't have let him out the room. How were your students?
He has that effect. I mean, there's a lot of the sort of consternation about why this didn't happen. We're political scientists. We're supposed to be able to explain this. But keep in mind, I never pretended to my students or anyone else that this was going to be like a blue wave of any kind. I mean, the truth is there are 70 million people that voted for Trump, and that's what they did. There just happens to be more that voted for Biden, and more of them in places that really matter. And listen, I think that to add to the perspective that Professor Hibbard's giving, I would say that to those of us that have been around, we don't take anything for granted, and not just after 2016, but you can't take anything for granted. We have to remember, for example, the headline in, I think, our own Chicago Tribune that said, Dewey beats Truman. So polls have always been conflicted, and a divided nation, they're unreliable, frankly.
Yeah.
So are both of you suggesting that we either ditch polls or fire the pollsters and get a new set?
Well, I don't.
It's not their fault, in my opinion. But I'll let Scott weigh in on this one.
The challenges is, polling needs to evolve with the technology, and right now a lot of polling is still done on landlines. And I don't know about you, but I have caller ID, and if I don't recognize the number, I don't take it. Right? And they don't, they haven't been polling on with text messaging, which is is probably going to be more accurate, because I think more people, are tied to their cell phones than they are to their landlines.
Yeah.
So they get, part of polling is, it's an inaccurate science. You're sampling and you're trying to get, a accurate representation of different demographics and projecting from that small sample to the larger community. And, again, doing phone calls isn't working. And so they need to kind of adapt to it. But one thing I would add too is there's always this thing which is commonly referred to as the enthusiasm gap. And one of the things that really, quite frankly, hindered Hillary Clinton, her campaign, is that she was not. People were willing to vote for her, but they weren't enthusiastic about her.
Right.
I mean, one of the interesting things about Trump, whether love him or hate him, is he generates enthusiasm. I mean, I've always been surprised that people who wait in line to hear a speech. I mean, I won't do that. Even for candidates I really like. There is an enthusiasm for him, and I think that his ability to barnstorm through the country in the last 2 weeks of the election helped really generate that momentum and helped generate the mobilization and that enthusiasm that helped, maybe not push him over the edge, but got his base turned out. And I think that's why the Republicans did so well in both the House and the Senate, and in state legislatures.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I really want to get to this moral side, the big tent versus the narrow alley. Let's call it an alley. And I also want to think about, does this election mimic past elections in its animosities? This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV. I have the honor again of talking with my two political guys, Scott Hibbard and Khalil Marrar. We'll be right back. We are back with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV. We're talking about after the elections with Professors Scott Hibbard and Khalil Marrar. And I gave you some stuff to think about, and let me introduce it in this way. Both of you deal with the Middle East, the home to the phrase failed state. Do we have Americans on both sides who want the United States to be a failed state so it can begin again with their competing ideals at the center? It took me a whole day to come up with that question, so don't grin at me.
Clearly,
it's a good question. I don't know where to even begin by talking about what's wrong with a failed state. I mean, Thomas Hobbes had ideas about a failed state. This guy called Hobbes.
I happen to know who Hobbes is, but my audience may not.
I don't want to bore them to tears with but I will say the following. Suffice it to say that a failed state is a state of civil war. And
yay, that's us.
War. Listen, we rebuilt after 1865. They called it Reconstruction. It lasted for about 10 years, and then it ended. So I would be very careful about even though I get this sentiment, I would be very careful talking about a failed state. I'm more of a Hobbesian or Thomas Hobbes minded when I think about state failure, but I definitely understand.
What does that mean? I'm a hobby, whatever you say.
Well, like, I mean, I believe that states are nice. They give us comfort, security. They may not give us sunshine, but they definitely give us comfort and security. And I think that the only problem with what could be happening that is not happening right now is that it could always get worse. It could always get worse, folks. Excuse me. So here's what I'm saying. Long story short, the tech difficulties are getting to me. The idea that we're so divided that we can't even see eye to eye on who should be president. The American people have already let their voice be heard. I don't think that's a failed state. I think that's a testament to the strength of the American state.
Yeah. So
I think you're somebody who came here from somewhere else.
I am.
I'm just saying, it's clear to me, but that's okay.
Well, so but here's the kind of thing what Khalil is getting at is part of the idea of Hobbes was writing in the context of the English Civil War, and some kind of order is better than no order. And so,
but that's what all of those Arab and Muslim rulers have said throughout the century, and they wound up in damn failed states.
Yeah, I know. No, but my own answer to the question though is that it's not nobody wants a failed state.
Yeah.
What people want is control of the state apparatus in order to enact their vision.
Yeah.
Now, I think the merit of the American system is that it allows for differences of opinion, and in an odd way, we have divided government because we have divided people. Mm-hmm. So we've got one party that controls one branch of the House or the Congress, one party that controls the other House of Congress. Then we get another party that controls the executive branch, and in an odd way, and then of course the states are very divided themselves. But that's a reflection of, again, this is the governing or the government reflecting the divergent views of the population, and a lot of the problem really does kind of come down to this idea that as a society we've really lost this core consensus about what this society should be, and we can look at this in a really negative light. My own view is that if you look at the youth vote and the turnout this last cycle, it was incredibly blue. And I think that the younger generation is coming of age in a very different world, where your sexual orientation or your race or your ethnicity is really meaningless, in a way that even like 2 generations ago or 1 generation ago, what your religion was huge. Catholic wouldn't marry Protestant, and so the society is evolving, and my thought is that as this new generation comes of age, we will see change. But for now, we're a deeply divided society with differing views as to which direction the government or the society should go.
And Aminah and Scott, let's keep in mind our conversation from the previous show. I mean, we're sort of in a different world today, even though we're in the same world. We didn't know the outcome of the election. Now we know a little bit better about the outcome of the election. We didn't know that, we would have record turnout the way we did. We didn't know even about COVID's raging in cities like El Paso. It's literally like ripping them apart. We didn't know how bad this could get. And at least now we have more clarity. And I would say that more clarity is better than no clarity. That is not to say that we're heading in the right direction. I mean, the truth is, whether you voted for Trump or Biden or Republican or Democrat or whether you've never voted at all, the truth is we remain divided about exactly what Scott's talking about exactly what you're talking about, Aminah. And that is, we remain divided about what the country should look like. A failed state, it's not. We have a mechanism that is actually very successful. So far, so good. Very successful at mediating those interests, those ideas of what the country should be.
Yeah, but the country, I'm just pushing this point because it sticks in my craw. And that is that, but you didn't elect, we didn't elect someone who was representative of either party. We elected a TV reality show host
Yeah. Yeah.
who felt that he didn't have to have allegiance anywhere except to himself and his family.
Yeah. So if I can respond to that, just
Mm-hmm.
the flip side is people voted for him in 2016, but people voted him out in 2020. And so now we're actually in this moment where there really is a stress test for the institutions of the society. And getting back to your point about a failed state at the end of the day is about the governing institutions collapsing, a refusal of a peaceful handover of power after an election. So we're now going through this moment of stress, and we're kind of waiting to see how the institutions will respond. And so far, so good. I mean, honestly, I am pleasantly surprised that the way in which the voting process unfolded and the way in which the counting has unfolded has really been remarkably stable, and there's been a lot of integrity to the process. So that's actually giving me a great deal of hope.
And Aminah, in my opinion, is that the only thing that's worse than that, or just as bad as a failed state, is two states where there was a time in our history where we had two states, a confederacy and a union, that were at each other's than dead Americans. I mean, it could always get worse, but we've actually had it worse. And that's right. I'm not an apologist, and I'm not some runt immigrant that came to this country that loves it now. No, I love my country for different reasons than just being a runt immigrant. That I am. What I love it for is that every time, as Scott said, that I think, oh my God, that hell is freezing over, that it's falling down on us. I'm basically disabused of that because the system is actually working. It's not perfect. It's not great. And it's working oftentimes for the wrong people. But I will be emphatic about this, and I will be shameless about it. It is working.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for that.
Okay, y'all calm me down. I get off my horse of a failed state.
And it's a good thing to be that way. I've always liked that about you.
Yeah, one of the things that we had talked about before we went to break was winning a political war, but losing a moral one. And while we may not be where Hobbes, and I'm wondering what he would have to say if he were alive at this moment and seeing, our modification of something or the other. How do we mitigate the undressing that America has taken with regard to its public institutions and all of this stuff during this election COVID cycle?
That's a big question.
I am for big questions.
Yeah. So let me kind of address this in a roundabout way by also addressing the question that popped up on the screen from the caller, because the caller was asking about Georgia, and that's huge. That in that vote holds the balance of the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
If the Democrats are able to win both of those seats, which I'm not optimistic that will happen, but I am hopeful it might. Putting my hand on my politics here. But at least you would actually have a functional government. I mean, it would still be a challenge, but at least you'd have a working, be a 50-50 split in the Senate. And what would be really ironic is then the Senate, then the president of the Senate would cast every tie-breaking vote, and that president of the Senate is the sitting vice president, Kamala Harris,
or that idiot with the
well, yes. But the point is that if there is some cohesiveness to the government, you don't have divided government, divided gridlock. We could actually the society, the government could actually get some things done.
Yeah.
And I think that would, at the end of the day, legitimacy is premised on your ability to deliver. And if this administration is able to actually carry out many of its projected goals, I think that will go a long way to mitigating the the craziness that's unfolded over the last 4 years.
So, with all of these kind of overriding much of Congress's tasks with these executive orders just flowing like rivers, and firing and hiring. I don't even know what those people are. What are they? Capitalist, something or the other, corporation people into a government. They've never worked in government. How does one even begin to undo the damage of his extension of the executive privilege? Darn, did I get all that in one sentence?
Yeah. Well, let me give a brief answer, and I'll let Khalil answer more broadly. But again, this is where I think that the Biden administration really is already signaling a return to normality. That one of the things that defined the Trump administration is they brought in people who had no expertise in government, but represented industry, and they used their positions of influence to benefit their patrons or their industry or their companies. I think you're going to see you're already seeing a return to professionalism within the government agencies.
Okay.
I think that's going to be really helpful. And as far as executive orders go, executive orders are easily rolled back. You sign an executive order, well then, day one, President-elect Joe Biden steps in, after he's inaugurated, he'll be signing executive orders that will be rolling back many of the ones that President Trump had ordered. I think the real problem comes in trying to make more permanent changes through legislation, because that's got to go through Congress, and that's a heavier lift. But anyway, we'll see.
I think just that point you made is what confused the general American public.
Something went wrong.
Oh, there's an executive order, a presidential executive order. That means it's there. And what you just said, I think, clarified for a lot of folk is it's temporary unless no one touches it, kind of thing.
Exactly.
But the kind of meat and guts environment of Congress is divided.
Well,
no, it's
right now it is.
Yeah.
But it remains to be seen what's going to happen in Georgia, because that in Georgia, the two races, the 2 Senate seats are the margin of victory. That will determine who controls the Senate, for the next 2 years, next few years.
That's where Bloomberg should have put his money, huh? Down in darn Georgia. Well, tell him that dig up some extra change or something.
Yeah, it's also where Stacey Abrams has really done a remarkable job for the.
Yeah.
I mean, really, her ability to mobilize people and get voters out. I mean, it was just huge.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's the other part. These lower levels of public official, below the governors, and then mayors. But then it's all these other officials who determine everything from gerrymandering to who controls this, to who can sit where, and the darn post office. I have, and maybe it happened to somewhere else, and I'm not a historian. But was there ever a time when you took up the post boxes and started snatching away the infrastructure so people couldn't count votes? That either of you remember? I mean, this has been horrible.
Yeah, well, put it this way, there's always been a certain amount of what we call dirty tricks. In the election process.
Yeah, of course.
And some of that includes minimizing the amount of polling booths in East Cleveland and having plenty in the suburbs. Knowing where the Democratic performing precincts, where the Republican performing precincts. Obviously, there's racial issue there as well. Where the black precincts, where the white precincts. But that's legal. In the same way that what Governor Abbott did down in Texas of having like one drop-off point for a ballot per county, whether you have 2 million people in the county or 4,000, it's legal, entirely unethical. but there's always been a lot of that in campaigns in America, and that's the unseemly side of the game.
But it's normal, kind of natural. I would ask both of you to look at the question that is on the TV, because even during this election, and correct me because I know I'm wrong, some treaty or the other, I wanted to say, I don't know if it was the Paris Accords or something else that I don't normally pay attention to, ended, right? And for a hot moment, we started reflecting upon that connected network of treaties and other kinds of things that keep us connected with the world. And answer that question.
And it was, by the way, it was Paris at the UN that just recently expired, and it was set to expire at the end of the term of the president that made it expire. That's the way the rules are at the UN.
Oh, okay.
On climate change.
So let's look at this. In the long run, how determined has the Trump administration been for our foreign relationships? I noticed that Merkel and the crazy haired dude in Britain, somebody else, were quick, and Macron were quick to call him or Biden and send notes. But how damaging has the Trump administration been for not only for the Muslim world and for the rest of the world and all of those political things?
Go ahead, Khalil.
Well, I mean, for the Muslim world, it's been about as damaging as it's ever been in one respect. I mean, the truth is, it's a mixed bag. I'm not going to defend this president's foreign policy approach any more than I could defend Obama's. I took a lot of issue with President Obama's, so I'm not going to defend Trump's, and I'm not going to equate them either. They're not the same. This administration has committed crimes against our values and our interests abroad, period. Let's leave it at that for now. What I take issue with, and where I think that the Trump administration has failed miserably, is in talking one game and doing a different thing. We were told about North Korea that they wouldn't do this and that, and here they are. We were told about China that they wouldn't do this, and here they are. So, yeah, our relations have actually improved dramatically with totalitarians, dictators, but we've always had a good relationship with dictators. That's not the point. The bigger point, and I think the very good point that you're making, Aminah, is one about the sort of the American image abroad, values, of the idea that we're the land of the free, of the idea that we're actually, saviors of the world in many ways. World War I, for example, World War II, especially. Yes, that has taken a hit. And there's a lot of people that are worried, especially our European allies. And yet at the same time, just the very idea that we're going to have a different president has already began repairing those. And here's the thing. The European Union, British with Brexit, our European allies have no other option. And we have no other option either. We need the alliance. They need the alliance. Where I think that Biden and Trump agree is on China. And the Chinese factor definitely will be something that we need to address. All of us need to address as Americans, we the people, but that our administration needs to address. And we need to have a steady, as John McCain once said, a steady hand on the tiller in terms of our approach to China. I don't think that Biden will defer that much. He'll be less blustering, and he'll be less over-promising and under-delivering.
Yeah. If I could add to that, this is an important point. The questioner really hits an important issue. We've gone through this, one set of policies, a reaction, another set of policies, and in what kind of, and you could look at Obama as a reaction to George W. Bush, and Trump is definitely a reaction to Obama. But there has been a kind of an isolationist sentiment, but also a very militarized approach to American foreign policy. And I think one of the things I've really criticized the Trump administration for is basically gutting the State Department. The State Department has already been going through a period of neglect for the last 30 years. And but the Trump administration systematically sought to defund it, pushed many of the longtime career professionals out. Our diplomatic capability is greatly hindered. And this gets to the question, how long is it going to take to rebuild that? And I think, I fear it will take a long time, because this is institutional capacities, and that's when you just hire a bunch of people out of undergrad to go take over. And I think the other part of the equation is, Trump definitely rattled our European alliances in a way that I don't think any of the Europeans ever have. And even if we now have a more traditional president coming in, will they look at us the same? Will they look at us as a reliable ally, or are they kind of going to hedge their bets because 4 years down the road, Donald Trump Jr. might be running for president, or whoever? Are we a reliable ally?
I don't think I could stand it. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a huge issue. Then finally, on China, one of the first things Donald Trump did is he pulled us out of the Trans-Professional Partnership negotiation, the TPP. People didn't like it because it was a free trade agreement, but the larger issue is it was actually as much political and social as it was economic. Part of it was trying to build a alliance that would contain China. Create a security relationship and political relationship, or solidify them with Australia, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, and a number of other countries, Singapore. And this, the whole point of that was to try to contain China, because they're concerned about China. And I don't have no idea. 4 years has slid by. I'm not sure how we put that genie back in the bottle. Okay,
we're going to take another short break. I want to come back with something both of you said. And I think that isolationists and interventionists, allies, I think they're all euphemisms for something I don't understand. So I'm going to go digging. And I want to go, not, I don't want to really leave U.S. politics, but I really want to go to foreign policy, because I don't think that has had enough of the attention it deserves, since I got you two geniuses here. So I'm going to do that. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV, and I'll be back with my two favorite political science people, Scott Hibbard and Khalil Marrar. We'll be right back. We are back with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV. Both of you know the Muslim world extremely well, especially the Arab Muslim world. And there's this interesting relationship going on that me sitting back here at home, and I don't do political science, saying, what the hell is going on here? You got people begging for U.S. intervention. When the U.S. intervenes, then they're pissed off because the U.S. intervenes and then doesn't go anywhere and starts sucking off their resources and stuff. Like, you're going to pay every time we step foot on your stuff, right? But they keep begging. On the other hand, the U.S. is so screwed up their politics with the help of their allies that their fight to get whole is, just corrupted. Talk to me, guys. I'm the I don't know person here.
Khalil, you want to start with this, or?
Well, we're also the know nothings, even though they call. It's we have to be very careful. With great power comes great responsibility, and you're right, Aminah, that our politics are so messed up. Who are we to be helping anybody? And even the other point that you're making, which is like, every time we do intervene, there is another gripe, right? We create another problem. The solution creates its problems, right?
Right.
But with great power comes great responsibility. What I think.
No. With great power doesn't mean I got to come to your house and take over.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right about that. Which is exact. But it is one way to look at it is I come to your house and do this and that. Another way to look at it is you have a very rich uncle who basically could splash money everywhere, right? Or military force everywhere. Everybody is going to be asking that rich uncle or aunt, right? Let's not be sexist here.
No, let's be sexist.
To spend money, to spend their money or to spend their military might unwisely, or in ways that have unintended consequences. Listen, you're absolutely right about that. I think that we have to resist the, if you will, the temptation, the urge to intervene, no matter how just the issue, while at the same time, we have to remember that we set up the world in such a way, the post-World War order, and I don't mean just Americans, I mean worldwide, right? Asians, Africans, Latin Americans, whoever we are, we set up Europeans, we set up the world in a way that forces us to interact, that forces us to sometimes intervene, sometimes.
Why?
Because of this little thing, interdependence. I mean, we all depend on one another. Trump keeps calling the COVID-19, he keeps calling it the Wuhan virus or the Kung flu or whatever the heck he calls it, right? The truth is, this is something that emerged very, 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 very far away. Wuhan, China is so far away, I can't even tell you. I'm not a geographer.
Yeah, but people are moving, but I don't understand intervention.
Okay, so let me chime in here for a minute.
It's the price of interdependence, I think. But go on, Scott.
It ain't, because the other side don't get nothing.
I think part of what Khalil is getting at is from after 1990, 91, the Gulf War, second Gulf War, the U.S. became the hegemonic power in the region. There was and we've got longstanding security alliances with the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. Egypt, I mean, all of the region. And so there's an expectation that we will remain engaged to protect their security. And part of
their own damn security. Why I gotta protect it?
Right. So, but part of the criticism of Obama from the region was that we weren't standing by our allies. We weren't, doing their bidding, if you will. Now, I think that from the Obama administration's perspective, they're looking at this, the region, and the U.S. went into Iraq on false pretenses, but that intervention failed miserably.
Right.
They didn't go into Syria. The Obama administration didn't go into Syria, and that was a disaster. And they led from behind in Libya, and that was a disaster. So whether you go in or you don't go in, it doesn't
matter.
I think part of the problem of this entire discussion is when we talk about intervention, we're talking about military intervention.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to go back to Khalil's point about the rich uncle. We could be much more effective if we led diplomatically and we followed through with economic aid. That kind of an intervention, I think, would go much further and would actually earn us some friends. And just two quick stories on this. I was in Tunisia a few years ago, and I was part of this program, and I had an opportunity or the group had an opportunity to meet with the individual who was the first president coming out of the 2011 uprisings. He was interim president. But one of the things that he he mentioned to us very forcefully is he kept going to the Obama administration saying, "Hey, we need cash. I appreciate the kind words on democracy and political transformation, but if we can't get the economy going and we can't make this work for the population, there are going to be more protests in the streets tomorrow." And I just kept thinking about a conversation I had with an Egyptian diplomat back in the 2000, who was basically saying, America could earn an enormous amount of goodwill with an Arab Marshall Fund, a serious amount of money into the region. building infrastructure, building internet, building schools, that would go. That's the kind of intervention that pays off for in the long run.
But we're here, and we need our own Marshall Plan. You're right.
Indeed,
we're falling apart. Our infrastructure is falling apart.
Yeah.
Our school systems are falling apart. You have ultra high unemployment rates in some ethnic communities.
Yeah.
You have all of these disparities, and you got people way over somewhere else begging.
Yeah.
I mean, I said earlier, intervention is the cost of interdependence. I will say this, that in this, you don't have to be a historian to know this, that Martin Luther King, the great ideas that he had were also ideas that were shared by Mahatma Gandhi. They, in many ways.
Yeah, but they're two very, Mahatma Gandhi was talking about the same people in the same ethnicity and salt.
Well, what I'm trying to say is this. It's pretty straightforward, and that is that the system that we have today, the system that we've had after the Second World War, is one where, and this is why I study foreign policy, is
right.
Because foreign policy is domestic policy, right? In many ways, in different forms, in many ways, right? Here's what I'm saying. The idea that American GIs were coming home from the Second World War and looking at the horrors of racism in Europe forced us to confront ourselves as a nation. It didn't maybe create the civil rights movement, but it definitely sparked it. It definitely gave it form. It definitely allowed us to look, for example, at what's happening in Vietnam. There's a reason why the Vietnam War also coincides with the civil rights movement. What happens abroad isn't just something about the abroad. I agree with you. We need a Marshall Plan here in this country, but we could do both. The problem with the rich uncle thing that I was talking about earlier, and that Scott also talked about just now, is that we have two rich uncles now, and there's no such thing ever as two rich uncles. It's basically a rich husband and a wife. China now has money, and they're cleaning our clock in places like Africa, building infrastructure because it's beneficial to China to build infrastructure in Africa.
But it's also beneficial to the Africans, and we didn't build any darn infrastructure.
Bingo. That's a great point that you're making. Is that how do we find an approach that allows us to balance between our values, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness for all, not just for some, and our interests of cold hard cash coming over our way, or power projection, and so on. We need to revisit, and I feel like it's been lost under this administration, the Trump administration, frankly.
Yeah.
So, and I'll chime in here real quick. One of the things that I marvel at is there's always this discussion that there's no money to do anything. But when the savings and loan industry collapses, all of a sudden we find $500 billion.
Or Corona with $8 trillion.
Or when the 2008 financial collapse happens, we find billions of dollars.
That's right.
When the Trump administration passed its tax cut, it was about 1.3 trillion. People found money for that. Much of that went to the top 5%, or probably more the top 1%. Right. Amazon, because of that, did not pay taxes last year. There are changes in the tax policy of this society that could pay for a lot of the infrastructure development we're talking about, or investment in domestic communities. We spend an obscene amount of money on the military, and we spend it on military systems that are really designed for World War II and the Cold War. And the whole idea of having these massive carrier groups is so last century. But there's huge momentum, and there's a lot of defense contractors make a lot of money out of it. We could as a society, we could rethink these fundamental issues. And now you've got money for schools, you got money for infrastructure, you got for investment in America's cities and reindustrializing them, and also investing in societies overseas as well. I mean, it can be done if there's the political will, but that political will is not.
Well, two things. One, I might ask both of you, because you're thinkers, and one of the things that's been absent is a lot of thought. And when we need the academic community to think about how do we rethink. You know, if doing nothing more than providing broad guidelines that can be, or even isolating, you know, that domino thingy, you know, where we can isolate core issues that will affect other issues, you know, so that you don't have everything rising to be a priority, right? I think that that is one of the things that is critical in this time. And what I want to do is give each of you a minute to leave us with some thoughts before I bribe you. Since Scott, I know, is at the end of his quarter, and I don't want him to go on vacation. Khalil, I don't know if you all are on quarters, but if you are, I don't want you to go on vacation either. So I will give each of you a moment. Last thoughts. And take these programs to your classes. Go ahead.
Khalil, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, go.
All right, 1 minute. Here it is. The system that we have in place is the only system that we have, unless we're willing to undergo the root canal of a failed state or a two-state or whatever, right? And I think that it's working. It's meant to be slow. And you know what? That's really easy for me to say, or for academics to say, who basically we have a privileged existence, right?
Yeah.
Tell that to the person whose, you know, spouse died of COVID and is unemployed. You know, tell that to somebody who's really truly seen suffering or seen literally the hell that they're facing on a daily basis. But the only way by which to change that is not to do what we've done in the past. I think it's to benefit from ideas like the ones that were just espoused by you, Aminah, the ones that were just espoused by Scott, right? Is to have sound, smart public policy instead of putting our head in the sand and pretending like, I don't hear it, I don't hear it, I don't hear it. That's what we've had 4 years of. It cannot ever be that bad again, and yet it will be, and it has been in the past. And that's all we could do is be optimistic about the system working.
Yeah.
Scott?
So the one thing that actually really heartened me about this last election, even though you know, the margins were much tighter than expected, and the turnout wasn't exactly what I had hoped for, but we do have a new president. And but the thing that really struck me is the turnout was so high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that level of engagement, I mean, that makes democracy
For
work.
America. Yeah.
Yeah, for America.
Yeah.
And so if there's a lesson I'd like to leave with our viewers is stay engaged. I mean, this is the real challenge. Is, you know, people tend to, you know, engage during the last 2 weeks of an election, of a presidential election, and they tune out for the next 4 years. And one of the problems that's really killed Democrats, and actually, and particularly certain demographics, particularly the youth vote,
yeah,
is they don't turn out for the midterm elections.
Yeah.
Older people do. It's not a surprise that Social Security and Medicare get funded, and school and universities and school grants don't.
Yeah.
If people stay engaged, government will respond to them. And so, yeah. So that's cautiously optimistic.
We're short, but we will be back. This has been Professor Aminah Al-Deen, post-election discussion with Professors Scott Hibbard and Khalil Marrar. This has been a blast, guys. Stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you.